Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for a special year-end edition of Arkansas Week. As most of you know, we like to spend a half hour with each of our U.S. senators at the conclusion of the year. And the Honorable John Boozman, the senior senator from Arkansas, joins us now from Washington, D.C. via the wonders of technology. Senator, thanks very much for making yourself available.
No, thanks, Steve, and it's sure good to be with you. I wish I was there in the studio with you.
Well, you're otherwise occupied.
I've got a good excuse.
Yeah, well, it's exactly. All right. Now, we should advise the audience that because of your schedule and the AETN schedule and all the uncertainties and the improbabilities attending to the legislative calendar, we're having to tape our broadcast on December the 7th, which is approximately, I think, 2.5 or 3 weeks before this was. So we may have to be a little thematic here. But let me begin with fiscal matters here, because you have you and the leadership have triumphed in getting a tax bill through. But the question that even many Republicans, but certainly a lot of Democrats are asking is, where are all the deficit hawks in your party?
Well, we're working hard to get a tax bill done, and I believe we'll do that. I think it'll be great for the American people, individuals. I think it'll be great also for corporations. We have the highest tax rate of any industrialized country in the world right now. We live in a very global economy, and as a result of that, capital is going to flow wherever they can get the best deal. So we're at 39%. The rest of the world is about 22.5%. What we've got to do to make it such that this is deficit neutral, so as after it's all said and done, we need about 0.4% growth. All of the projections are figured on 1.9% growth. That was the Obama growth years, which are the least of any president since President Eisenhower. And so we feel like, in doing this, we'll certainly get up to 2.3, 2.4. As we speak, the growth the last few quarters has been around 3%. So I think those numbers are very, very reachable.
Well, let me come back to a couple of points that you just made, but in a second. The president is saying now that he believes that you can go to 6% GDP growth. Is that feasible to you?
That seems pretty high to me, but I do think that 3%, 3.2%, around 3% is the historical average. So I think that's very, very doable. If we do that, though, we will more than exceed the dollars that we need and actually have additional dollars coming into the Treasury. That's the plan, and we're working hard to do that. But it is important that we do get competitive to the rest of the world. The other thing that we're doing, Steve, that's so important is making it such that we straighten out our foreign tax entities. There's a couple $1 trillion sitting overseas. This is going to make it such that we can bring that money home. Companies will want to bring that money home, invest it in the United States, and I think that'll be a huge boost to our economy also.
Senator, you talked about a second ago that it would be great, I think your term, great for corporations. The critics of the bill say it's entirely too great for corporations and skewed heavily not only toward corporations, but toward the most affluent Americans. And you're familiar with this criticism that altogether too little of the tax relief is going to the middle class. And in fact, over the 10-year life of the bill, their taxes would actually go up. Your response?
No, well, they're not going to go up. Right now, we're in a situation where we're doubling the child tax credit. We're doubling the standard deduction. For most people in Arkansas, that's going to be a tremendous relief and something that's going to be greatly appreciated. The corporate tax rate is going to go down around 2%, maybe a little bit more. We're sorting those details out right now. But what that's designed to do is make us such that we'll be down there around that 22.5% that's current right now. The problem is Ireland, I think, is around 12%. The UK is going down to 17.5%. We used to be the leader in that area. And so we're at 39%. A lot of companies are paying 35%. So what we'd like to do, again, is be competitive. So, no, it's going to be great for the average person in Arkansas, especially with the standard deduction going up, doubling, and then also the child tax credit.
Well, sir, whether it's through repatriation or simply a lower domestic rate, is there any guarantee that corporations will in fact use the money to invest?
There's not, but I do think that common sense tells us that if you've got, that kind of capital available, that things will be such. But you have to do it with other things too, Steve. And you can look at the president, look at what he's been trying to do the last year. He's doing what he said he would do. He's trying to get rid of the unnecessary regulation that we've had. The regulatory burden is coming down. And certainly we need regulation. Everybody needs to be held accountable. We need to have that helping us out in that regard, but we don't need unnecessary regulation. And so things are stable that way. The business community is sensing that. Individuals are sensing it. And as a result, I think that's the major reason that we've got this uptick, this 3% GDP growth, which in past years under the Obama administration has been about 1.9%, a huge difference.
Well, we also had a pretty big deficit. You talked earlier, Senator, about how the rate of recovery rate of GDP growth was, I think, the lowest since President Eisenhower's. You also had the deepest recession since Mr. Roosevelt, did you not? Hoover and Roosevelt.
Well, President Obama inherited that. But really, Steve, when you think about it, that should have made it such that his numbers looked that much better, because he inherited a situation that was a deep hole, got a little bit deeper, but then you should have, significant increase climbing out of that. That's been the pattern always in the past, but it wasn't. The recovery has been very anemic, and that's been not a good situation. So that actually should have made his numbers look better, but they didn't.
Well, right now, you've got a situation in where there is some fear, and it's being expressed at the Fed, that doesn't help much if you don't have a job, but the recovery may be is plenty robust as it is. You've got unemployment of about 4.4.
Yes,
and corporation and GDP in the neighborhood of 4, approaching 4%. That in fact we may be overheating.
Well, and that might be true. What we want to do, though, is maintain that range rather than going back down to the 1.9. So if we can maintain that range, then that's going to significantly, because of the increase in GDP, it's a huge increase to the tax receipts coming into the government. But if we can do that, then we'll be in good shape, and we'll have the dollars flowing in to significantly reduce our deficit.
Well, but in the near term, sir, at least over the life of the tax bill as written, the most conservative estimate that I could find of additions to the debt was a half a trillion, and that came from the tax foundation. Your own committees are talking about well over that. At least $1 trillion seems to be the average. $1 trillion added to the debt. Now, can growth?
That's based on 1.9% growth. They're using the growth rate over the last 9 years.
Well, they say they're being careful, sir.
Well, that's a very conservative number, though. Again, we're at 3% now. You're talking about the Fed talking about 4%. So everybody's talking in terms of significant growth. We've just got to maintain that, and that's really what this bill is all about. But all of the studies that you're indicating, those all go back to a 1.9% growth, and we can do better than that. the country always has. But it's not just this bill, Steve. Again, it's the regulatory atmosphere, the things like that that go along with it. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've had an increased stock market and things like that. Businesses know that now they don't have to worry about every Friday some regulation coming out of the Labor Department or EPA or whatever that is going to be an unfunded mandate. They didn't know what the rules are. The rules were constantly changing. You can play with bad rules, you can play with good rules. If you don't know what the rules are, you've got a major problem. And so what we're trying to do is stabilizing that. I do think that the president, Congress, and the cabinet his cabinet officials are doing a good job of making it such that there's a lot more stability. That's really helped with the economy.
You mentioned, Senator, a second ago that your side is anticipating that corporations with additional revenues, post-tax revenues, can expand, can create jobs. They're sitting on plenty of cash now, are they not? Why don't they spend it now?
Well, again, I think the reason that they've had in the past is, as I mentioned, about not knowing the rules, the regulatory atmosphere, things like that. They are starting to spend it. And you're having corporate confidence, consumer confidence is up. And as a result of that, then they are starting to invest. That's where we've gotten this 3% increase in the last couple of quarters, which is going to be so beneficial. We've got to maintain that, and we do have to become more competitive. So we not only want to create new jobs, we want to protect the jobs that we've got. We don't want to continue to see our manufacturing leaving, going to other parts of the world because they get such a much better deal. We'd like to get it down to the point where we see other countries coming into the United States. They're doing that somewhat now. We're starting to turn that around because we are such a stable economy. We have low energy prices. We can be so blessed, with that. We've got low interest rates. But if we also have the low tax base, then that's icing on the cake that's going to make a huge difference.
Well, we have low interest rates now, Senator, but do you fear we're on something of a roll? As you noted, the economy's been on it may have been slower than anyone would have preferred, but it's been pretty steady. It's like 8 or 9 year recovery now, and probably in about its 9th year. And some of the experts are saying we're due for a fall. We're due for a bust. Now that's not going to do interest rates much good in the near term.
No, I understand that, but I would argue that the economy for the last several years, if you talk to any business person, virtually any business person would say that it's been pretty anemic, and some would say it's still, even though we've got low unemployment right now, some would say that the economy is still pretty anemic. So we've got to maintain the growth that we're starting to see now, and really just starting to see now. If we can do that, then we'll be in good shape. So the economy is complicated. You do the best you can do, but I do think it's very, very important that we are in a position that we can compete, get back in the game overseas, protect our manufacturing. Along with this, Steve, are all the other things that's going, with it, in the sense that, everybody needs to go through a modern factory right now. If you go through, the first thing you wonder is, where's everybody at? Because these places now can be run through technology, robotics, the quality of skills that it takes to run that equipment, and then also the quality of skill that it takes to fix it. So we've got to meet those demands. We do have to protect the jobs that we've got. You can have a situation where a company will, take and invest several $100 million into the plant. It doesn't create any more jobs because of robotics, but it does protect the jobs that are there.
Well, let me move on.
Lots going on right now.
Yeah, why not make the individual tax cuts permanent?
It's just a matter of dollars. What we'd like to do is get going, and then go forward, and then in a few years come back and make them permanent. But it's the way that the the rules are made with the doing this through reconciliation. It doesn't allow that. Otherwise, we would make them permanent.
Well, but the rule was, that rule though is keyed on a certain increase in debt and deficit, is it not, Senator? I mean, are you? Was this
No, it's
specifically engineered to avoid a Senate filibuster?
exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. You know, it's keyed in a sense of using a tool in the toolbox to go forward, and so we can come back and in the next year or two, whatever, and then extend those or eventually make those permanent.
Well, I guess
what happened. That's what happened. With the Bush tax cuts, they were eventually made permanent. A good portion of those were made permanent. We were in the same situation with those, but we were able to make those permanent.
Well, let me move on to something else. So you lost today, December the 7th. You lost a Senate colleague, a gentleman from Minnesota, a colleague, albeit on the other side of the aisle. There is legislation owing to allegations, some of which he denies, but owing to allegations that he mistreated women, sexually molested or harassed, women. There's legislation on the House side that would make transparent, or that would open to complete disclosure, I believe, the fund that members of Congress have relied upon to settle claims against members of Congress and or staff. Would you support that legislation if it came to your side?
Yes, I would very much support that. I think we need to be as transparent as we can be. I've got 3 adult daughters. I've got 2 little granddaughters. I finally have had a little grandson about a month ago, so we're excited about that. But yeah, I understand how important this is. We started the sexual harassment training in our office as this stuff started to come about before it was mandated. So we really are trying to do the right thing, and just emphasizing to everybody that I've got anything to do with how important this is. But also legislation like you're indicating that makes things transparent, I don't have any problems with it at all.
Senator, you have in days past, you've indicated that you would vastly prefer that your party's candidate for the Senate in Alabama stand aside. He has repeatedly declined to do that, and now he's on the ballot. The election, I think, is December the 12th, just a few days from the time we're taping this program. With the resignation of Mr. Conyers on the House side, the announced resignation of your colleague, Mr. Franken, what sort of position does that leave your party in? Because the RNC has now resumed support. Mr. Trump has now resumed his endorsement. Do you?
Well, I can't speak for them, but I can speak for the Senate and the Senatorial Committee. The finance arm of the campaign of the Senate has not done that. And so we're in a situation now where again, many of us have called for him to step down. He's chosen not to do that. And so under the law, under the Constitution, we'll have an election. It's my understanding, too, that he has to be seated. And then what we proposed with Senator Franken and him, and Senator Franken actually volunteered to do this, was to go before the Ethics Committee. So I think the Ethics Committee takes it up, depending on what they find, and they need to do a thorough investigation and report back as to what transpired. And then depending on that, if it's such that he's, guilty of the things that he's alleged to have done, then I would be in favor of throwing him out.
What about in his farewell address to the Senate, or in making his announcement to the Senate, Mr. Franken pointedly mentioned that similar allegations have been lodged against the incumbent president of the United States. Is your party in kind of perilous position here with, particularly with women voters? Is there a double standard at work here?
I don't think so. Again, the president was elected with, full knowledge of those allegations. In the case of Mr. Franken and Representative Conyers And then we've got a couple Republicans also in the House that one of them is elected, Barton is elected not to run for re-election because of these things. You had physical contact and this and that. So I do think it, is a little bit different in that regard. And so, that's kind of where we're at.
Let me move on, sir, and that's the matter of DACA. You've got a lot. The Democratic, the loyal opposition is asking for quite a lot to get resolved in these last few weeks, or because we got a debt vote coming up. As a matter of fact, the government runs out of money in about 36 hours from the time we're talking. There's also a proposal.
That's why I'm up here and not with you.
No, and why you may stay there at least through. You may do your Christmas shopping up there.
Yeah.
And if there's a 2-week stop, well, that'll just kick it over to December the 22nd. The Democrats are asking for rather a lot in terms of coming on board, and this they can block. How much should they get, particularly with DACA? That seems to be at the top of their list.
Yeah. Republicans also are asking for some things, and defense is right at the top of their list. You're right, DACA, making it such that we go forward with President Obama's actually making it legal. There's a court that held that he didn't have the authority to do what he did in making such, giving a legal status to these young people. I think everybody would like to get there in the sense that these are young people that have been here for their duration of their life in many cases. I've seen homecoming queens. I've seen young people that were first in their class in this situation. On the other hand, what we don't want is the vehicle to becoming, to have status, the public school system. And so I think you have to, along with doing this, you have to talk about securing the border, making sure that we don't have a situation where this is resolved, but then 10 years later, we're in the same situation with a whole new generation of young people, with this problem. So I think you have to secure the border and then kind of go from there. The other problem is chain migration, the ability that once, you're made legal with the citizenship or whatever, you can start bringing in other extended family members and things. Then the numbers add up a great deal, and that's a real problem also. So those are the things that they're trying to work through, and I think people are negotiating in good faith. So we'll have to wait and see how it's resolved.
Well, your leader, Mr. McConnell, seemed to indicate at last report anyway that he might be open to an increase in non-defense spending as well as a way to break the logjam. You go along with that?
Well, again, it depends on the numbers. And so, we'll have to wait and see. That's really where we're at right now. So I'd have to see what numbers we're talking about, where it's going to be put, things like that.
Well, let me go back.
You can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways too, Steve. As you pointed out, the Democrats are screaming about the debt and the deficit regarding, the tax program, which, I think we've got a good chance of actually reducing the debt and the deficit. But you can't scream about that and then wanting to significantly increase the deficit through increased spending on these other things.
Well, it's sort of a he said, she said, is it not, Senator? Because it was your party for the last 8 years that was screaming, if I may use the term, borrow your term, about debt and deficit. Now the shoe seems to be on the other foot, and that's been the argument against this tax bill, or one of them anyway.
And now they're screaming, but also along with the screaming are intent on significantly increasing the deficit as we go forward for the next year. So these are things that we really are working hard to resolve. I know that it appears that there's no each side not wanting to resolve these things, but we really are working hard to try and get on the same page so that we can come to an accommodation. Nobody wants to shut the government down.
Well, on and back on the budget, Speaker Ryan indicated there was some Democratic criticism that said, well, basically what the GOP wants to do in both chambers is to go ahead and get a tax bill through and then use the debt and deficit as a lever or as an argument for going after entitlement programs. Speaker Ryan himself seems to have validated that point of view with the ink still wet on the Senate version. Should Americans get ready for some sort of sustained attack or reconfiguration, anyway, of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid?
No, and this is so very important. And I hope your listeners are really listening, in the sense that I understand how important those programs are. I'm a healthcare provider. I'm an optometrist. Medicare is very important. Social Security. My mom passed away, in her late 80s a couple of years ago. I understand through her and her friends, living it, how important that is. And then again, having many patients that's simply all they've got. So we need to protect it. We need to preserve it. I'll do everything I can to do that. Now, when you start looking at the demographics, you get to a point where you got a problem. When Social Security was formed, you got it when you're 65. The death rate was 64. We're blessed. I mentioned my mom. We're living much longer now. Medicare the same way. Medicare with the cost of medicine and procedures, the drugs, all of that, so much greater than it used to be. But we can deal with that, and there's ways that we can tweak Social Security. You can raise the age a little bit. You can raise the cap, a little bit on the contribution. Not for people that are retired now or anywhere close to retiring, but for young people. That simply, if you don't do that, even if you pay all that's owed, which we're going to do, you still run into a deficit because you've got so many fewer workers than you do people retired. But we can do that, and that's going to take a discussion with Democrats, Republicans, the president, and then most importantly, the American people.
Senator, I'm sorry, I have to end it there because we're out of time. We're about to lose our satellite time too, I think, as a matter of fact. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to being in the studio personally.
We'll try to do it in the flesh next time. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And thanks to you for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.